Right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Uh, this quote was told to me by a CEO, and it basically encapsulates how most of my clients felt. But over time, I kept seeing, the bullet point issues crop up time and time again. And at some point, I realized that the real issue was the business transformation wasn't happening. And so I set out to create what I'm going to show you today. The goal of this, and I'm not going to go through this diagram, don't worry, but the goal of this basically is to create an operating model that's going to take the goals and strategies of a company and execute against those to drive enterprise value. And when I talk about enterprise value, I'm not just talking about EBITDA, but also EBITDA multiples, because two companies can have the same EBITDA, but one is worth a lot more. So the whole idea is that operating model needs to focus on those things that are going to increase the multiples as well. And the approach basically.
Sorry, sorry, is it okay to interrupt you? Sorry.
Sure.
I just have. And the whole thing about EBITDA and multiples, I mean, that's of concern to people that are trying to sell their business to sort of acquirers or private equity or attract funding and the rest of it. Do you think that's a measure that's used in established enterprises as well, or is there a different measure which places some value on the outcome of doing a transformation?
So the idea behind the transformation, though, is to make the company worth more, even to the owners. So they may not want to be selling at this point in time, but certainly they do want their earnings to be higher, because that means they're more, their profits are increasing. And they do want, if the business is worth more in terms of multiples for them, it always gives them the flexibility to either leverage that to go get financing to buy, do acquisitions. So it enables them to do more than, if they didn't address it. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I guess it's probably more in an enterprise context where businesses are publicly traded.
No, actually, private ones too. Because if a private company wants to sell their business, or if somebody gets
sorry, I meant that you don't tend to hear enterprises that have traded shares talking about multiples. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's not a critical thing. It was just whether that immediately puts that we're focusing on mid-market with this.
No, I mean, even small, like so a $5 million company.
Yeah, sorry, small or medium size. Sorry, rather than enterprises, rather than bigger enterprises.
Yes,
anyway,
right.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
So the 7 stages basically are if you want to look at it this way, the journey of the operating model. So when we sit down and talk about business success, that becomes the strategic operating model, which then gets driven down to the functional operating model. And then when you get to putting in the system, you're going to leverage system capabilities to further enhance that. So now you have a system operating model. And then you need to align the organization to that, which creates the organization operating model that becomes the executable model that needs to be implemented. So I'm just going to go through these stages. But first, sort of the underlying theme behind this is successful companies do the right things right. And for me, doing the right thing meant adding value to those that can affect the success of an organization. And I identified 8 distinct value groups. So this applies to every aspect of a business. And the other part is, in order to do that, you need to have the right kind of controls. And I found that in a lot of companies, controls tend to be very weak. So, okay, the first stage, basically, when I engage with anybody, the first thing is an executive workshop to look at where do you want to be in 3 years? What's it going to take to get there? What are the challenges? And as I tell them, we want to make sure that all the decisions we're making support the direction for the company. And of course, this is tying all these system efforts to the outcomes that they want to achieve at that point. And the other part is, well, once we've identified the goals, let's make sure we understand everything that's needed to get there. So one of the top 3 pet food producers in the US had hired me to help them with an ERP system selection. And, that quote I showed a couple of slides ago, that's the first thing the CEO said to me. He said, Ted, I want to talk about implementation because I hear horror stories. So what kind of challenges can we expect? I said, well, not that this applies to you, but accountability has been a big challenge. He goes, Ted, that's not an issue, but go ahead, give me an example. I said, well, not that this applies to you, but if nobody's accountable for inventory accuracy, putting in a new system won't solve the problem. He said, Ted, we got that covered. He turned to the president and said, David, tell Ted who's in charge of inventory accuracy. And the president looked at him and said, no one. Maybe that's why we had that $14 million write-off. So right off the bat, yeah, the problem is on their side of the fence. And the other part that we're looking at when I talked about controls is, can we get better control over our destiny, better control over the outcomes? So one client that said, I want to get the same day shipping told me, we were at 5-day, we went to 2-day. If we get the same day shipping, we get a huge competitive advantage. But when I looked at their products and their customers, I was like, I don't know why these people need to do last minute buying. So I got the CEO to let me interview their top 20 customers and found out that we could get 6 to 12 months advance notice on demand. So we interviewed other customers and found that for the majority of sales, we could get 3 months advance notice and buy everything to order. So it was actually easy to implement the solution. And 15 months later, they went on to buy a company twice their size. The other part, now we're down to a functional operating model. One of the things, obviously, we don't want to carry forward unnecessary or inefficient processes. A custom high-end furniture manufacturer that hired us to help them with an ERP selection. Their focus was on doing the supplier quote module because they were doing 15,000 supplier quotes a month. Somebody would walk into a showroom and go, I like the sofa, but can I get it an inch longer? Okay, we'll get you a quote. Oh, I might want the back a couple inches higher. Okay, we'll get you a quote for that. They go to the suppliers, get their quotes, come back, compile them, and turn them around to the prospect. Now, it takes about 5 days. So, of course, the prospect isn't going to sit in a showroom for 5 days. So they, get out of the showroom, walk down the street, maybe going somewhere else. Their close rate was about 5% at this point. Now, I looked at this process. I go, okay, this process has delays, excess work, and excess cost. And I did further digging and found that suppliers had to do about 50 quotes to get one order. And I'm thinking, it doesn't seem to be adding a lot of value. So I asked the project manager to interview talk to the major supplier. And he came back a couple hours later and said, Ted, I ended up talking to the CEO. He hates the process. He's hired several people. He spends more time quoting than manufacturing. And he's thinking of quitting as a supplier. But we came up with a plan. We're going to divide everything into 3 size ranges and do fixed prices. And if we put that in place, he said he's going to drop the price 20%. So I said, sounds good. Let's talk to our suppliers. And they all jumped on board. So I went back to the CEO and said, hey, you're going to get a 14.5% reduction in cost of goods sold. You don't need a 13-person design department anymore. You don't need to spend money on the licenses for the supplier quote module, and you don't need to pay for the implementation. And more importantly, even before we put the system in, you can manually turn around a quote while they're in the showroom. Give them a glass of champagne, cappuccino. By the time they're done, you'll have a quote ready for them, which should increase your close rate, which it actually did, went up to about a little over 20% in about 3 months. So now the interesting thing is somebody could have gone in and implemented the supplier quote module. They could have done a fantastic job, put in AI, automated everything, and just hands off completely. The major problem with that, the major problem with that is one thing. Now, actually, aside from the fact that it's still going to take 5 days and their close rate would still be at 5%, but the major problem is one Monday they go live and everybody's excited and happy, hands off. And on Wednesday, the suppliers call and go, we quit. which is going to be very disruptive for the business. So sometimes the internal view isn't the right view. The other part is on, looking at the system side. One thing I learned from doing a lot of large scale software development, as well as system selections and implementations, is the data model's a critical component of it. If you want to take an existing data model and add some additional capabilities, that's one thing. But if you need to restructure the data model, that's a big deal. Many years ago, I got hired by one of the big eight. One of the reasons they hired me was I had a system selection methodology. In my second week on the job, my boss called and said, Ted, I got an opportunity for you. The senior accounting manager is going to take you out to the client and introduce you to him. And so I went out, talked to the people, got introduced. And then after a while, called my boss and said, okay, what the hell's going on? He said, the project manager's like 80. They brought him out of retirement. He set up a call center and he's hired 20 people, and the senior accounting manager is nowhere to be found. He said, Ted, okay, let me explain. They've tried to get a system for 7 years and ended up in court every time. The latest one is a grand jury hearing with Arthur Anderson, which is now Accenture, and I forget the name of the other company. But, right now, this is their last kick at the can. And if it fails, nobody really wants to be associated with it. Good luck. Thank you, I think. So I got to look at the previous requirements document. It was 110 pages of 20 requirements per page, which was, ranked, weighted, scored, you name it. And apparently that was part of the debate in the court was, well, if you'd interviewed people on a different day, this 7 could have been an 8 over here. That would have changed the outcome. And this 7 over here, if it had been a 6, would have changed the outcome. And anyway, my document ended up being 6 pages. The first page had an overview of the organization and what they were trying to accomplish and 5 key requirements. The next set of pages were key demo scenarios, and the last were the key data models. And they sent this out to hundreds of companies. I should point out that the client was the Orange County Transit District in Southern California. So that's all the buses and everything. And their lawyers were so paranoid that not only did they send it to every software vendor, but they sent it to anybody that ran auto shops. So you guys probably haven't heard of Pep Boys, but it's a chain of auto stores in repair areas. And so if you had a chain like that, you got this document. Anyway, only 5 companies responded. And of course, that's where the call center came in. They called everybody else to find out why they didn't respond. And they said, well, we didn't meet the requirements on the first page. So we got to the 5 remaining ones. And we said, hey, we're going to review your database. And if its structure doesn't support the key data models, you're out. So it left us with 3. A couple of weeks later, actually probably a few weeks later, I got called to the conference room. And when I got there, there was cake, ginger ale, balloons, and the happiest group of people I'd ever met. So sometimes the simple document really works.
Just on that, sorry, just to go back to that, because I'm also of the view that big lists of requirements are complicated and unnecessary to a degree. So what is the approach when it comes to actually, articulating the requirements?
So the data model is the critical part. It tells you about the complexity that has to be handled. So you can come in and go, here are the 5, aside from the functional scope. So you've got your functional scope, and then you've got the level of complexity that it has to be able to handle. And so again, you don't need things like, if let's say it's a manufacturing system. If you see a requirement, we need to be able to track on-hand inventory, every package does that. You haven't eliminated anything. If you said, I want to get a house, you don't go, well, I need a house that has doors, or, a place to sleep would be nice. You haven't eliminated anything in any country at that point. So you get down to, what are the key things? Number of rooms, location. So it's a few key things. The same applies here, is the types of things, like, are you doing ETO, if it's manufacturing, engineer to order or configure to order? that kind of thing. So what are the key kinds of things you're doing, and what's the level of complexity that has to be handled?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so this is basically designing the system. I wish I thought of precision configuration, but I didn't. So going forward, I'm going to have a slide that says precision configuration in bold, and underneath it'll just say C. James. But one thing that drove me crazy was testing. God, I hated testing with a passion. It was so painful in every project I was on. And somewhere along the line, I came across test-driven development, and I liked the concept, so I kind of adopted that. And the idea is when you're in design, before you finish that stage, you have a solution architect and then a lead person from the UAT, the testing team, get together and they create a master test script. So if it's how do we create a sales order? You've got a test script that says here's the happy path, the error exception handling, and any error handling and exception handling paths. So you've documented all of that and how you're actually going, what you expect to do and how you expect the system to respond. And then when the developers come along, they break that up into pieces or user stories, and those user stories carry with them all those test steps with them. And so when you get to UAT, you know everything's going to pass because it's already been designed that way. Now, a while back, I got hired by a SaaS vendor, and my first week there, I met with their largest customer, who was really upset about the past UAT efforts. Actually, they were withholding millions of dollars in payments. And apparently, the week before I joined the company, the VP had called our CEO and told him, if things don't improve, I'm going to take my business elsewhere, and I'm not paying that $7 million that I owe you. So when I got there and met with him, I said, look, apparently we suck at development. So here's what I recommend is a different approach. And he went, okay, that sounds okay. I said, there's one caveat. If it's not in the test script, it's out of scope. He said, okay, I can live with that. So we got the UAT, ran through everything, told everybody, okay, you got 2 weeks for UAT. And next day, the VP called me and said, Ted, I'm putting a hold or putting a stop to UAT. He said, but let me explain. This morning, one of my reps called and said the system's not working. And I called out the script and I said, okay, which step isn't working? And she said, oh, I didn't use that. I do it, blah, blah, blah. He went, you can't do that. That will get us in trouble. You need to follow the script. And he said, the minute I said that, I went, yeah, if I hire somebody, I'm going to say, here's the script. As a matter of fact, when I get off this call, I'm going to tell everybody, you want to work here, you follow this script. So I'm signing off on UAT at this point. I had one other UAT, same approach. We were done in 2 hours. When I went through that, I worked with the person. I got to the end and said, you guys got 2 weeks. He said, Ted, hang on. I talked to everybody before we got here. I explained this whole process, this test script, and that this is how we're going to standardize everything we're doing. And I told everybody to come prepared to walk through an example while you were doing the workshop. And I just got feedback from everybody that they're signed off. And so that's the end of UAT. So I never had a UAT last longer than 2 days. Now, all right, so we figured out the system design, and now we come to, okay, we have to align the organization. At this point, we've gone through a process where we've identified, in order to address the strategic operating model, we had to have new capabilities. We've gone through that process, like, hey, you no longer have to have a supplier quote module. There are new ways of doing things. We've got to the system. We've leveraged their capabilities. So at this point, there's been a lot of process change, which means roles change, which means job descriptions need to change. And then we need to do a fit assessment for people. Now, the interesting thing, or the thing that always surprised me, is I talked to a lot of people in change management practices at large professional services companies, and they tell me, what they do is we do communications, Ted. We come up with the messaging about the transformation, and then we train people on how to use the new system to do their job. And I'm like, you don't do any of the things I just described? Like, if you come to me and say, Ted, on Monday, you're going to have a new way of doing things, but we're still going to measure you on what you did yesterday and how you did it yesterday. I'm probably just going to keep doing what I did yesterday. So I don't know how their change management is actually any change.
I think in those situations, a lot of people would say that that's, if you like, they probably bag it up as being HR rather than change management, and therefore it's not change management's accountability or responsibility. But that's certainly that what you've just highlighted there is certainly something that in fact, I think some of my early projects, that was precisely my role, was to map out the role descriptions and work with HR on what the job changes were accordingly. But I think a lot of change managers tend to say it's that side of things is an HR problem, not a change management problem, which is wrong.
Agreed. And I just one note about culture. So early on, one of the ERP vendors had told my client, "Oh, this is going to be a huge culture change for your people, going from a manual process to an automated process." And the president looked at him and said, "Well, how is that a culture change?" And he just went, So I figured if we're going to mention culture, because everybody does, let's describe what makes up culture or what influences it and what we're going to change in that. So that's just that. This one, I won't go into much detail. It's pretty standard transition planning. It's got the readiness assessment at the bottom, but it's basically standard stuff. And then the other thing at the end is a lot of companies go, okay, we went live, let's monitor user adoption, which means they check to see if people logged in, but that's not the key. The key is, did people use the system the way they're supposed to? So you need to be able to measure that and make sure it's getting used properly. And the other part that gets overlooked is, well, are we making progress towards the business goals? So we meet with the executives on a monthly basis to go over, our progress to date on the business goals and determine, is there anything we can do to improve progress by changes in the system or changes in the business? And then typically after about 6 months, something happens in the business environment, either tariffs or a war or whatever. And now you got to figure out, well, how do we adapt to this new environment? So you're working with them for usually about another 6 months until they're on a steady path and they're demonstrating progress towards the business goals. And okay, last thing I'm going to do, make sure, I think I'm almost out of time, but the last thing is our role. So in a lot of projects, I've been in a lot of system selection efforts where the implementers come in the room and they go, okay, for implementation, I'm going to need 20% of your time. And for you three, I need 50% of your time. And for you, I need 80% of your time. And Mr. CEO, you need to backfill these people. And then when they leave the room, it's total chaos. One of the earlier ones on, I remember this woman in sales going like, wait a second, I have to train people to do my job. And then when they have questions, which they will, I have to stop what I'm doing, rush over and help them. And then I got to review everything they do, because if they do it wrong, it's going to end up on my plate to go fix it. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not doing it. And then the executives are like, Ted, where am I supposed to put these people? I don't have desks and computers sitting around doing nothing, waiting for people. I don't even know if I've got the space for these people. So what I've told them in our role is, as I tell the users, we learned a lot during the system selection. So we understand your business and we understand ERP or systems. And so we can work with the implementer. And if we have specific, SME questions that come up, we'll reach out to you on an ad hoc basis, but, it might be an hour a week or so. And they're like, okay, that's fine. That's what I want. And the executives, we tell them, hey, we understand where you want to go. Our goal is to create the operating model that's going to get you there. So we're going to work with your team and the system implementer to get that result. And they're like, that's what we want. We're good with that. So, okay.
How do you, in that sort of situation or in that model, how do you ensure that the business users feel a sense of ownership or responsibility for the solution that's delivered?
So here's the thing it's a good question. But what I noticed in companies is that sometimes they have an ownership right up until something doesn't work. And the minute it doesn't work, nobody had any, like, oh, that's not how I want to do. So if it works,
Yeah.
they're happy campers. If you hired somebody, you wouldn't go, hey, before we, start you on the job, you want to take a look at this and decide how we should set up the system. So you just go, here's the system and it works. And they go, okay, as long as it makes their job easier. Now, one thing I noticed early on that really aggravated me and made me move into this was probably at the first, what we did, we used to go, the system implementer would guide the users, and then we would be there more as project managers. And so one of the first ones we did, the system, they went, okay, there's 12 ways of setting up the base part of this system. And when they went through the 12, my team went, yeah, number 3, that's the one. But what happened was they took the users through every single one. And they would take them through something that was like, let's say these people are making laptops. And they would go, yeah, if you're doing engineering, projects, number 12, this is, they would take them through everything and they would go, well, yeah, okay, that's not right. Number 3 didn't come in at number 3, it came in the last. In other words, they had 3 people for 3 days going through every possible thing. They billed for 9 days to get to, here's the way you need to set it up, when it was obvious in the first 5 minutes. And I talked to somebody that I had worked with at Ernst & Young, who was working with an Oracle partner. He said, Ted, we spent 30 days doing that whole process. We know day 1 which one's right, but we walk them through every single other way that it can be done in order to get there. And I'm like, you're just billing for the sake of billing. How did that help them? And then 3 weeks later, on that first one, I asked the users, do you remember the 12 ways of doing it? They were like, no. They couldn't even remember, like, what were all the options and why did we, and they were never going to go and set up the system that way again. So in 4 months, they wouldn't even remember why it was set up that way.
Dude, it sounds like you.
Sorry, Brian, did I answer?
Sorry, let James chip in on it.
It sounds like you take a very much more hands-on engagement kind of approach compared to the average consultant. I mean, I do much the same. I get very hands-on and start acting on behalf of the client because I think I understand what the client wants. And you're doing the same, whereas the average consultant sits back and says, no, I'm just the facilitator.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the user's perspective. They're not conceptual. They're not ERP experts. Some of them, in like the early days, had not seen these systems. So when MRP2 was being implemented, Apex did a study and found that 80% of the customizations that were put in year 1 were ripped out in year 2. So if somebody went and spent $200,000, $160,000 of that was waste. And the reason it was built was the users went, well, I understand my current thing, so I want the system to kind of look like the current one, but solve the problems I don't like with my current one. And then over the year, they got to go, oh, I see some stuff in this system I'd like to do, but I can't do it because I customed the system and I can no longer take advantage of that. So we need to rip that out so I can take advantage of it. So a lot of times the users are, they know how to do their job, but that doesn't mean they really understand how to translate that into ERP.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
That's been an interesting, Ted. I think really what I'm getting out of it is the point that I just made, which is a much more proactive role for you than the average consultant does. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it's right. I'm just highlighting that a majority of consultants don't do what you've described.
True, but much like your precision configuration, I I find it drives bigger benefits. I mean, take for example that custom furniture manufacturer. If they get literally, their suppliers were going to quit.
Yes, absolutely.
So that would not have been good for business. If you take the other company that wanted to go to same day, when they went from 5 days to 2 days, their inventory turns ballooned. Their inventory ballooned and their inventory turns went to 1.1. So cash flow was pretty bad at that point. Had they gone to same day shipping, they would have had to spend a huge amount on warehouse layout, automated material handling systems and other things. They probably would have gone out of business, instead of which they were able to buy a company twice their size. So I find that coming in and challenging a lot of the base assumptions about the business can have a big impact on the outcomes.
Absolutely. Right.
What do you reckon, Morgan?
In terms of the Ted, in terms of the sort of the traditional sort of work stream structures that you have in projects, is that something you would still have in place and an ownership from the business side for signing off on what's been delivered?
Oh yeah, you still have all that project management. So this approach that I have sits on top of a project governance or project management, process. But I didn't define it here because it's well defined. PMI, for example, has, solid. So it's just, I recognize one, project management methodologies are standard. Those would be used. When it comes to the system implementers have their own methodology for configuring their systems and doing their things. And so again, this sits on top of that. It's intended to address the business side as opposed to the other areas.
So you'd still conceptually organize things around end-to-end processes, even though the amount of time that the SMEs are embedded in the program might be less because you're spanning across the process, end-to-end process work streams, and you still have some sort of change organization sort of stream of activity. So it's more and then a data stream and maybe some sort of technical integration or whatever. Would you still have that type of structure? Is that what you're asking, Morgan?
Yeah, I was just trying to, I suppose, and one of the other points I think Ted was making was around the pushback on the amount of time, the resource allocations for the team and putting backfills in place. So I was just trying to understand what the structure around that. What I suppose, Ted, what you're thinking around that is.
So I guess there's two aspects to it, isn't there? There's what's the structure of the project organisation, not just the governance bit, but the project organisational structure, and what's the structure of the project plan? Because the two can be quite different, can't they? There might be very limited resources on the project org chart, but actually the project plan structure,
the client side sort of allocation of resources as well, and what's optimum there,
So. Depending on the size of the organization, you're going to have you still have a project structure where you're going to have somebody like the CEO is going to be the custodian of the system, and so they have their defined roles. The CFO is going to have an assigned role for signing off on those parts of it. You will have somebody who's going to be the point person for UAT, the super user. So you'll have somebody from an accounting side who's going to be, okay, I'm going to be the UAT tester for this. So they would work again with the solution architect from the SI to come up with that. Similarly, somebody in procurement is going to come up with the test scripts for that, and production planning, and so on. So you have all those people who are in the project and have a role in it.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't clear on what you were saying earlier on that.
But you are alleviating the need for people to release people from a day job, on a substantial basis, and that need to try and backfill, which never happens in smaller organisations, does it? It's only when it's big organisations who've got a bit of bandwidth and capacity available to do it, or the ability to redistribute work to other people.
Yeah.
But when you've only got 2 or 3 people in a particular area that do that job, then the ability to free them up to do project work is limited, isn't it? Do you think in the approach that you've got, I don't know whether you thought about how could you use AI capabilities increasingly to help you get to the outcomes that you want more quickly, more efficiently, and have even better use of resources?
So I think, in the past we've recently talked about AI on the projects and how documentation and process modeling and so on. So I think AI can help with a lot of that kind of thing in creating the documentation, the data models, and so on. So I think there's a role for it if I understand what you're asking, a role for it in helping the project. That's what I think you're asking, right?
Yeah. AI in the delivery of a project as opposed to AI within the solution. Yeah.
So I think there's now, I'm not an AI expert. I don't know how well it can read their current systems and databases. And, I know it can read documentation. The problem is, in most of the companies I'm in, that documentation I would like to have doesn't exist, or it was done years before and is no longer reflective of, current.
Yeah.
But I think in interviews, I think it can pull together a lot of information, and then consolidate that fairly quickly and come up with here's the process model and here are the data models, those kind of things.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing,
I think, sorry, I was going to say that certainly when you come to writing your scenarios and your test scripts, it can be. I think with the way that the tools have matured in recent months, that can be really effective to use it in those areas as well. If you could describe if you describe those various various operating models at different levels, then it's quite quick to be able to generate meaningful test scenarios that are gonna sort of prove whether it works or doesn't work.
Yeah, and when I was talking about the functional model, you saw the fishbone diagram and the Excel thing. So one of the things that happens in that was you go, okay, I'm looking at processes today. Here's a process. What are the sources of errors, delays, excess work, and excess cost? And so you're getting, okay, shipping. We had the wrong item shipped. Okay, then you can do root cause of, well, why was the wrong item shipped? Yeah. And so you take that information, you can go over the past 6 months and find out what are the costs associated with that. And now you can start saying, okay, if we do this, here's the cost in these areas. And if somebody looks at that and goes, well, I can't solve this with the current system, I need a new system, okay, well, what we're solving is $3 million worth of a problem, or we're solving $50,000 worth of a problem, don't throw 3 million at it. So I think AI can help in gathering that information and certainly organizing it and analyzing it.
Yeah.
Right. Morgan, thoughts from your side? You've been quite quiet.
No, just taking it in really in terms of the questions really were around the ones I just went through. Just understanding the structure, the team structures that I suppose Ted was intimating there. I suppose from a lot of the projects that were worked on, the teams are big teams, sort of organized in typical work streams with a work stream lead, and then subject matter experts doing a lot of the work around testing, etc. So that's sort of the approach that I've seen working well as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Agreed.
Rex, anything else?
That's good. And just one final question. It's in terms of how do you feel that life cycle approach can speed up the time to go live and the time to value?
So how does my approach speed that up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess we had one of the fastest ERP implementations way back when. So it's probably been beat now, but it was 2.5 months to implement ERP in 2 countries for a client. And because they were opening a facility in the UK, they were based in Los Angeles area. And so they needed to be able to ship product there on the books. And we started mid-September. By mid-November, actually, we were able to create the POs and so on. So the UK facility could receive the stuff. But we're able to expedite it because we understand a lot about the ERP, how it works. We're working full time. If you get into most companies, you're going to have a discussion where somebody goes, I would really like to go in this direction. And then somebody later on goes, well, that doesn't work for finance in our accounting. We need to go this way. And then somebody else would go, oh, yeah, but in production planning, that's going to cause me a problem, or material tracking. I don't want to do, lot tracking on my material just so you can have that. And so you end up with several debates going back and forth. We know the big picture. So having the big picture view is, and although we have experts, like on the project, we're going to have somebody who's a finance expert. We have somebody that's on the sales side, somebody that's on the production, and somebody on the procurement side, the supply chain. We still understand the concepts, of an overall solution. So we're able to work a lot faster on what's the right integrated approach.
And I think that's probably the other distinction, James, you were saying about the likes of Ted and yourself, and also probably me and Morgan as well, is being a lot more hands-on and directive about what's needed. But is also that breadth of understanding of the business model and the technology that supports it that a lot of consultants don't seem to have. They know their bit, but they don't really generally don't understand how it relates to the other bits. And as soon as you get into data and technical worlds, they start to glaze over. And I think those are,
that's true.
I mean, I think those are, comes back to, I think about the business systems practitioner side of things. Though that rounded sort of set of capabilities is what distinguishes whole business systems practitioners from partial ones.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There you go. Cool. Very good, Ted. Thank you.
Christopher, I didn't quite see when you joined. You sort of keeping a low profile. Any thoughts? You're muted. And your camera's off.
I think he's probably, oh, there he is. He's on.
Christopher, any thoughts?
You there?
No. I put somebody to sleep.
He joined quite late. Folks, I think that's about it then. Nothing more from my side. Brian, any more from your side?
No, it's good. Very good, Ted. Thanks.
Thanks,
Morgan?
Ted. It was good. Yeah, no, there was a good insights there. Thank you.
I think just an operational note. We didn't do enough, or I didn't do enough to promote this event today. I put a couple of posts on LinkedIn, and that was it. Oh, there's Christopher. Oh, there he was for a moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry. Your camera's off.
Let me see if I can get that working. Yeah, sorry. I have a number of other things happening on my workstation, so I had this running on my laptop to another screen, so no camera. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I found it very interesting, especially with regard to the level at which that initial requirements gathering and the development of stories is, especially for the development of test cases that you then validate against. We've had many negative experiences when it comes to actual testing, where new requirements seem to come out of the woodwork when you actually get to the point where you're trying to sign something off. These days, we are much more rigorous about defining those user stories up front and then basing test cases on those. And then, of course, using automation where we can to do primary validation before it goes to the client. So really, I completely agree. It's incredibly important to get all of that defined up front and use that as the means by which you actually sign off the delivery. So very interesting, very, very interesting. Also took on board some of your points with regard to project management. As it happens, our own system is kind of like ERP light, but with a lot of project management built in. And so we actually use the system to deliver the systems that we deliver to handle the orchestration across the organization. And ERP is an element of that. Again, so important to make sure you define up front who's responsible for what, who's meant to do what, and have the appropriate roles, and then drive that workflow through the delivery of the project. So very interesting. Completely agree with everything covered.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christopher.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, good.
All right.
Thank you, Ted.
I
Thanks
think
very
we,
much.
I think
Thanks,
we're
everyone.
complete.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Rightio.
I'm going to go and cook dinner now. See you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.